Returning to the castle, Roland felt even better. Suddenly, a flying messenger arrived at the window. Nightingale caught it, then brought it in and fed it with some grain. Roland began reading the secret letter from Hill. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he stood up in anger. How dare he? Roland growled, clutching the letter tightly. He then told Nightingale to gather everyone immediately. In the meeting hall, Roland explained the contents of the letter. Brian loudly declared, "Your Majesty, we must teach the Kingdom of Dawn a lesson. This time they disturbed the Eastern Territories. Who knows what they'll do next? They might even cross the border and invade us." Barav tried to calm him down. "No one can invade Grey Castle. If they could, why would we need the First Army in the first place?" Brian realized he might have overreacted. Barav suggested that diplomacy could resolve the issue. Listening to the heated discussion, Andrea seemed to be lost in thoughts. Roland clapped his hands, signaling everyone to take a break and have some food before continuing their discussion. While everyone enjoyed their snacks and chaos drinks, Scroll handed over the day's meeting notes to Roland. The letter from Hill mentioned three things. First, Anpian had plans to disrupt and invade the eastern territories of Grey Castle. Second, the instability in the Hermes and the church. And lastly, Otto had already been imprisoned. They had been discussing these matters for 3 days, and everyone agreed on recapturing the eastern territories and completely destroying the church. The only disagreement was on when to retaliate against the Kingdom of Dawn. Roland rubbed his forehead. Looking at someone at the table, he thought to himself that there was an opportunity to gain the most benefit with the least cost, but it required waiting for the right person to come to him. By evening, when he returned to his office, Andrea was there. She bowed to Roland, and seeing it was Andrea, he let out a slight sigh of relief. Finally, she had arrived. He thought to himself. Nightingale also appeared, handing Andrea a piece of dried fish, though Andrea didn't seem particularly enthusiastic. Roland already knew what she wanted to discuss. It was about rescuing her childhood friend, Otto. She took a deep breath and slowly nodded. Andrea had been part of the meeting. Now, to force Anpian into submission, they would need at least 3,000 soldiers. Including the forces attacking Hermes, it would total around 5,000, which was 80% of the First Army's strength. Roland then mentioned the logistics, including supply costs and the need for carts and manpower. Just as he was about to continue on how much it would cost Neverwinter, Nightingale pinched him in her mist gently and whispered in a voice only he could hear, "Stop pressuring her. Just say it directly." Andrea looked at Roland, puzzled as to why he suddenly stopped talking. He coughed a couple of times and said these were not a problem, but he needed to know just how far the three great families are willing to go. It was clear that Anpian had gone separate ways with the three families, and with the Divine War around the corner, Roland couldn't afford to waste much time on a neighboring nation that might put them at risk. He needed someone to replace the current royal family, and Andrea is a perfect candidate. Roland hoped she would become the new Queen of Dawn. Andrea quickly said she didn't want to leave Neverwinter. Roland seemed surprised only to see her bite her lip and finally admit she had no interest in the throne. Roland picked up his teacup and asked what about her father. He tells her that the other two families would also gain something from this power shift. After thinking for a moment, Andrea quickly said she believed her father would have no problem. Hearing this, he nodded in satisfaction and assured her that Otto wouldn't be imprisoned for long. After Andrea left, Nightingale, sitting on the desk, smiled and remarked that she initially thought Roland planned to become the King of Dawn himself. She recalled Roland mentioning his previous plan to support Andrea as queen, realizing he wasn't joking at the time. Soon, there was a knock on the door, and to his surprise, it was Isabella. She had heard from Agatha that Hermes had collapsed. Roland then shared what he had heard with her. Suddenly, he looked at her and asked if she was there to plead for the church. She quickly shook her head, explaining that she was worried about the hundreds of thousands of berserk pills stored by the church being discovered, which could impact Roland's upcoming plans. Roland then learned that the pills were scattered in hidden warehouses across the Hermes plateau. The locations were so obscure that even she couldn't pinpoint them exactly. She hoped Roland would trust her to go with the First Army. After thinking for a moment, Roland decided to let her join the First Army but instructed her not to engage in combat. Her task was solely to find and destroy the pills. Isabella tried to persuade Roland to keep the pills, but he waved his hands and didn't want to elaborate, saying that was not happening, and that he had another task for her. There were several monasteries in the old holy city, and he wanted her to free the orphans and women still living there and bring them back to the western region. Isabella didn't respond immediately, but she wondered why Roland wanted to do this. A few seconds later, she accepted the task. Roland was reminded by her that with Hermes losing its ability to maintain order, the monasteries could become hell on earth. He hoped to save those people if he still could. On the other side, Edith took off her coat as her brother, Cole, curiously asked why she came back so late. She tells him there's a lot of work today. Dinner was already prepared for her on the table. Eating the delicious foods of Neverwinter lifted her weariness from the day. After a while, Cole asked why she hadn't spoken at the meetings in the past few days, considering she was knowledgeable about the topics Roland raised. Edith looked at Cole with a smile and told him it was a secret. If he wanted to know, he would have to pay a price. Cole gulped hard, but he soon backed down, clearly not want to wear the same dress again. Seeing his expression, Edith laughed and decided that tonight's dinner would be the price. Edith had already guessed that Roland would choose Andrea as the shortcut to solving the Kingdom of Dawn's issue. She had observed that Roland had looked at Andrea 17 times over the past 3 days during the meeting. Cole was surprised at how detailed his sister was. He muttered something under his breath with a peculiar look. "What did you say?" Edith asked angrily. Nothing. Cole quickly waved his hand. He then mentioned seeing her approach Andrea after the meetings and asked what if her guess was wrong. Turned out, Edith had whispered in Andrea's ear, "His Majesty is a very benevolent king, and he has met Sir Otto before. If you ask him, he will likely agree to save Otto." For Edith, it was a casual remark. If she guessed right, it would help His Majesty. If she guessed wrong, who would care about a mere noble from another kingdom? The next day, the meeting went on as always, with ministers fervently debating and offering different opinions. After days of silence, Roland called for quiet and announced his decision. He declared that Neverwinter's forces would split into two. One group would enter the Hermes Plateau from Coldwind Ridge, while the other would traverse the eastern territories, heading straight to the kingdom's border. They would converge on Dawnlight City by late summer or early autumn, attacking the Kingdom of Dawn from the west and south. As soon as Roland issued this decree, the room fell silent. Everyone accepted the orders in unison. Even Barav, who had previously been cautious and wanted to solve it using diplomacy, had no more objections. Edith let out a breath of relief, realizing she had made the right bet. The entire western region instantly became a flurry of activity. Meanwhile, Lorca poured her gold coins onto the table. She started counting only to find there were 21 gold coins left. She frowned, realizing that in just half a month, she had spent 3/4 of her total savings. She had splurged on various delicacies, but the most insidious culprit was Evelyn's tavern. She mutters that even a gang of robbers couldn't have taken her money as efficiently. Finally, she slumped over the table in frustration, her ears drooping. But she knew well that it wasn't Evelyn's fault. She had chosen to drink there every day and lost to her desires. One drink led to another, and though Evelyn had tried to dissuade her, telling her that she was drinking too much, the beverages were just too delicious to resist. Determined to change her ways, she looked at her dwindling coins and made up her mind. Later that afternoon, entering the forest, she got undressed and transformed into her wolf form. She wasn't sure where she wanted to go, deciding to run in a straight line to clear her mind for now. Suddenly, she saw something diving towards her. She dodged quickly, and a terrifying beast crashed into the snow. The creature emerged from the snow, looking at her curiously. It made a cooing sound that seemed oddly familiar. "Maisie?" Lorca instinctively called out Maisie's name. "A talking wolf!" Maisie exclaimed, eyes wide with surprise. Another voice came from above, none other than Lightning, who curiously looked at Lorca and asked how she knew Maisie. Lorca transformed back into her human form and introduced herself, explaining that she knew Maisie through Ashes and Andrea. Maisie also shifted back to her human form and remembered meeting Lorca on the ship before. Lightning, feeling a bit left out, pointed at herself and asked if Ashes hadn't mentioned her. She reintroduced herself, proudly claiming to be the greatest explorer in the western region. She then corrected herself and said actually it's an olive gray castle. Maisie and Lightning both noticed that Lorca wasn't wearing any clothes. Maisie, curious, asked why she was naked. Maisie then glanced at Lorca's boing boing and compared it to her own, asking, "Did you change this too?" Lorca's face instantly turned red, and Lightning gave Maisie a playful chop on the head, explaining that it was a difference in their witch abilities. Once Lorca had dressed, she asked why did they attack her. Lightning, a bit embarrassed, admitted that they mistook her for a mutated snow wolf. She explained that their job was to clear out the demonic beasts and monitor the area, and also raid bird nests, gather honeycombs, and cook food. Maisie shouted, but clearly, those weren't really part of their job. Lorca understood it was all a misunderstanding. Lightning then asked why she was there, warning her that the area wasn't just infested with demonic beasts but also more terrifying creatures. However, the two were surprised when Lorca found out about demons. Lorca explained that she had heard rumors of demons appearing in an abandoned city and that she was hunting them. Lightning struggled to hold back laughter and asked where Lorca had heard that. It was then that Lorca learned from Lightning that the city she was talking about happened 400 years ago. Lightning chuckled, explaining that their mission was to patrol the area to prevent the demons from coming too close. They were still several days away from the city Lorca had mentioned. She then explained the history of the region. The place they are on was once called the Fertile Plains, which was larger than the four kingdoms combined. This made Lorca a bit frustrated. If there were no demons here, she would have wasted a lot of time. However, Lightning admired her courage, saying that embarking on a journey with just a few words of rumor showed the potential of an excellent explorer. She invited Lorca to join their exploration team, and Maisie invited her to roast some wild animals together. Lorca shook her head. Looking at the two girls, especially Maisie, despite her terrifying and strong transformation, it was clear that she had the mind of a child. She didn't feel like looking after children. As Lorca was about to leave, Lightning called out, offering to take her to the ruins of Takira if she joined their team. Lorca's ears perked up at this. Lightning boasted that in the past 400 years, only she and Maisie had explored the city walls of Takira and recounted how she had fought demons before, including a very powerful high-ranked demon. Because of this, Lorca was soon convinced. By nightfall, she was sitting on Maisie's back. As Maisie descended, Lorca wobbled through the snow until they reached their destination, not Takira, but the secret base of the exploration team. It was a simple hut made from tree stumps. Inside, Lightning placed a frog leg and meat on a wooden skewer, explaining that it would take 2 more days to reach Takira, and they would spend the night here. She wanted Lorca to try her cooking. Lorca curiously looked around. Turned out, the base was inside a hollowed-out tree stump, with branches and leaves filling the gaps to form a natural roof. The door and window openings had been carved out by Maisie, and they had found many similar resting spots all over the place. Lorca began to realize that these two were far more capable than she had initially thought. Soon, an enticing aroma wafted through the air, and Lightning handed her a skewer of roasted meat. Lorca took the skewer, hesitating for a moment before slowly bringing it to her mouth. Her eyes lit up with delight as she exclaimed, "This is delicious." Maisie, proud of her own work, and said how she caught this giant frog in the icy springs of the snowy mountains herself. Lorca was taken aback for a moment. Lightning quickly reassured her, "Don't worry. An explorer lives to discover the unknown, and that includes trying new and unique foods." Realizing it was frog meat made Lorca a bit hesitant, but the taste was too good to care. It doesn't matter, she thought, it's just too delicious. After chatting for a long time, the three of them had a good night's sleep and set out again the next day. They soon reached the abandoned city. From above, the ruins and broken walls stretched out, and Lorca quickly calculated that this place was at least 5 or 6 times larger than the Iron Sand City. Including the surrounding villages, this place probably held a population of over 1 million at one point. A kingdom that could build such a large city, yet lost to the demons? That's what Lorca pondered. Lightning spoke up, reminding Lorca that he probably already knew the history here. This was the last line of defense for the Witch Kingdom, which ultimately failed to withstand the demons. Gazing at the desolate land, she suddenly recalled what Roland had told her. The Divine War wasn't just a minor skirmish between two tribes but a full-scale war deciding which civilization would survive. She initially felt indignant, but now she began to understand. Soon, she also learned that if the demons were to attack Neverwinter, they would likely strike from the west. However, they couldn't advance further. Lorca was puzzled, so Maisie explained that the red mist inside was very dangerous for witches but essential for the demons. Lightning followed up saying today's clear weather made the sky appear blue, but on rainy days, they could see the red mist lingering on the horizon. This gas was lethal to witches, so Roland had warned them not to cross this area for their safety. Maisie then briefly explained the demons' weaknesses, which were their tubes. Lightning became very serious and instructed Lorca to retreat immediately and inform His Majesty if they encountered enemies. Lorca patted her chest, full of fighting spirit. Lightning then handed her a scroll containing a detailed map with marked unexplored areas, telling her to note anything she found interesting. Maisie quickly added that the most important rule for the exploration team was to find tasty food and wait for them to return before eating it, which made Lorca chuckle. From Maisie's words, Lorca gathered that the two of them were leaving this place. Lightning nodded and told Lorca that Roland was deploying troops and they needed to move with the First Army. They would be gone for several months. After all, their roles were crucial for scouting and spotting for the artillery team. Lightning patted her shoulder, entrusting her with the rest of the exploration mission. Back in Neverwinter, Roland stretched. Since he made the decision to go to war, he had been swamped with reports and documents. At first, he enjoyed the feeling of holding power, but as the content grew more complex, he started feeling overwhelmed by the endless paperwork. Thankfully, Scroll was there to help him organize everything. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Edith walked in, bringing the battle strategy she had devised for Roland. He looked at the plan with anticipation. Edith suggested using the abilities of the witches and Takira witches to launch attacks from multiple directions, including the sky and underground. Roland thought that although many ideas were still a bit rudimental, her vision was impressive for this era. However, for this plan to work, the Takira witches would need to follow orders instead of acting independently like they always do. Roland had an idea to solve this, but he would have to have all the combatants join him in the dream world once. Back in the dream world, Roland was abruptly woken up by someone calling him on the phone. Picking it up, it was Garcia. Roland rolled over and sat up. It was 6 in the morning and he asked Garcia if she knew what time it was. Garcia sounded somewhat irritated, perhaps still holding a grudge from the last time Roland ghosted her. Garcia knew that Roland had been curious about the erosion happening, then told him that the association had scheduled a tour for new members that very afternoon. She tells Roland to come find her after lunch, which throws off Roland's plans for the day. Roland felt it was unnecessary to meet up so early, but Garcia informed him that other newcomers from different places would also be joining, and coordinating would take time. Garcia's tone sharpened as she asked if Roland had new family members coming over again. Roland realized that if he refused, Garcia probably wouldn't bother with him again. Nonetheless, he was interested in learning about the world's erosion. So, Roland made an excuse, saying he had slept late the night before and needed a shower because he felt grimy. Garcia ended the call telling him please hurry up. Roland got dressed and opened his door. Little Zero was in the kitchen, wearing an apron and preparing breakfast. She was focused on frying eggs. She was surprised to see Roland up so early. Roland informed her that he would be back late and told her not to wait for him for dinner. She pouted while flipping the eggs, watching him leave. Out on the street, it was bustling with people. He walked into a nearby alley and found a building. He took out his keys, and this was their new hideout. Inside, several witches knelt on one knee, greeting him in unison, "Greetings, Your Majesty." Roland welcomed them to the dream world and told them he had a mission for them today. Roland laid out the plan for the day. The Martial Fighter Association was organizing an orientation for newcomers to understand the inner workings and would take them to the headquarters. Roland saw this as a chance to locate the base where they hid the natural power. Faulty summoned a small insect and had it crawl onto Roland, saying this would allow her to track his location. The bug then crawled into his collar. Despite the discomfort of having a bug climbing all over him, Roland decided to take Phyllis and Ling along. Roland asked Phyllis if she remembered how to hail a cab, and both Phyllis and Ling recited the instructions he had given them. Satisfied, Roland nodded. He then asked Ling to see if she could sneak in. Though this world lacked Stone of God punishment, he couldn't be sure if the Martial Fighter Association had other means to counteract magic. He emphasized Ling to keep herself safe as a priority, which they all nodded in agreement. Another witch then asked what she could do to help. Roland decided she should stay behind to look after the other Takira witches. He handed her a stack of money, saying it was for ordering takeout. She pouted, expressing that her abilities were also suitable for infiltration. Roland patted her head, promising that if she took good care of everyone, he would take her to the cinema next time. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and her spirits lifted. Seeing the adorable witch, Roland couldn't resist patting her head for the second time, which made her blush. After giving all the instructions, Roland ran back to the apartment, panting heavily. Garcia was in the hallway, talking on the phone. Roland had underestimated her vigilance. Despite rushing back as quickly as possible, he was still a step too late. Garcia noticed Roland and told the person on the other end of the line not to call again if it was just to persuade her. She then hung up. Roland asked if it was the other family again trying to talk about the demolition, but Garcia didn't want to discuss it with him. She gave him a skeptical look and asked if wasn't he supposed to be taking a shower. Roland smiled and said that Zero needed the bathroom urgently, so he went for a run instead. Sweating it out was just as good. Although it was hard for his martial fighter's body to sweat, that didn't matter. Garcia didn't press further. After a moment of silence, she mentioned that although she didn't want to interfere in Roland's personal life, she hoped he wouldn't be too indulgent, considering there was a child at home. Roland had no idea what she was talking about. He then realized Garcia was referring to the girls frequently coming and going from his place. He almost choked when he thought of this. He had been deliberately timing things so that Zero wouldn't see the Takira witches. They would disconnect their consciousness and enter the dream world after Zero went to school, so it didn't matter if anyone else saw them. But coming from Garcia, it sounded completely different. Garcia hoped he wouldn't lose himself. Roland knew this misunderstanding would be hard to clear up. He quickly interrupted her, asking if he could change his clothes first. Garcia, visibly annoyed, and glared at him. After getting ready, Roland put on a newly purchased suit, surprising Garcia. He explained that it was his first visit to headquarters, so he wanted to dress formally. Garcia stammered a bit, not expecting the usually scruffy Roland to clean up so well. She even blushed slightly. "You actually look pretty good," she said, adjusting her hair before quickly running off, urging Roland to follow. Roland chuckled, thinking to himself that the custom-made suit was worth the money. They went downstairs, and soon a large bus stopped in front of them. Roland noticed the bus had no license plates, and its windows were covered with black curtains, and he couldn't see inside. Behind the bus, a taxi was parked, and Phyllis gave Roland an okay gesture before getting into the taxi herself. Garcia hurried Roland onto the bus, grabbing his hand and leading him to the back. The inside of the bus was dark, and there were many people, all with eyes full of hostility. Roland and Garcia sat in the back, and she told him that these people were also newly awakened members. Roland could see the malice in their eyes but remembered Garcia mentioning that not everyone was on their side. There had been conflicts before, where newly awakened members killed several association members during missions. The association had to send what she referred to as a guardian to resolve the situation. She explained that their power was a gift from the gods meant for self-defense, not for harming others. If they couldn't stop the erosion, the entire world would be doomed. She let out a sigh while lamenting that many people enjoyed the thrill of power and forgot their responsibilities. Roland couldn't help but think that the witches 800 years ago probably had the same idea when they established the Federation. He dozed off for a bit, and soon they reached their destination. He could feel the bus descending, similar to the sensation of being in an elevator. Just as Roland was wondering, Garcia pointed to the window, and outside the curtains. Roland saw they were in a tunnel, slowly descending. Each level had a number, and it was clear they had reached the 93rd floor. Seeing this futuristic tunnel, deep underground, he suddenly felt that his own third border town which he built himself really paled in comparison. The other passengers also stood up, looking out in amazement. Roland looked outside, unsure if the witches could infiltrate this place. After reaching the 235th floor, they stopped. The bus slowly enters another tunnel. They then stopped at a plaza, and Roland slowly got off, still finding it hard to believe they were underground. Looking around, he saw many people from other cities. Garcia explained that the association had many branches but only 2 headquarters. To get close to the erosion, they had to come to one of these places. Roland was slightly taken aback, realizing that the erosion she was referring to was not only visible but also tangible, although Garcia warned him that he would definitely not want to touch it. At that moment, the overhead lights dimmed, drawing everyone's attention to the center. A girl named Lon, wearing an eye patch, walked up. She was the top disciple of one of the guardians. She welcomed everyone to Prism City. The crowd was not happy upon hearing she was just a disciple, considering the long journey they had made. Others also started booing her. Lon calmly explained that welcoming new members was usually the guardian's responsibility. However, due to some trouble in another city, her teacher and the other 3 guardians had left the day before, so she was in charge of the reception. She continued, saying that many in the crowd had awakened years ago, but their willingness to come here would mean that had acknowledged the association's capabilities. Because of that, she hoped everyone would put aside the past and unite against the fallen. Lon continued, representing the association, and told everyone that their past identities and statuses didn't matter, only their future actions did. They needed to unite, and if anyone disagreed with the association's methods, they could leave now. The plaza fell silent, not a single person moved, and even the murmurs quieted down. Roland nodded, thinking that this top disciple really knew what she was doing. Garcia glanced at Roland and mentioned that Lon was her teacher. It was Lon they were supposed to meet last time, which surprised Roland. Garcia warned him that her teacher despised irresponsible and tardy people, to which Roland could only manage a wry smile. Lon clapped her hands, welcoming everyone. She then lowered her voice, saying they would soon see the imminent crisis the world is facing. She spoke gravely, emphasizing that they would soon understand that the divine war was not far off. Roland was shocked by her final words. Why was there a divine war in the dream world? He glanced at Garcia, whose expression remained unchanged, leaving him unsure if she knew about this or simply didn't care. Everyone followed Lon into another tunnel, and Roland noticed that the floor was a moving walkway. He wondered why the headquarters was built underground, perhaps to prevent invasions? Garcia saw his questioning look and explained that the place was originally an underground mine, and they utilized the abandoned tunnels. Some parts were newly excavated, depending on the erosion's pace. Roland was surprised, so the association built underground to prevent the spread of erosion. Garcia shook her head, saying nothing could stop erosion expanding. The headquarters weren't defending against erosion but against malicious awakened individuals. Roland wanted to ask more, but Garcia gently shook her head, telling him he would understand soon. The tunnel led the group to another hall, which looked like a conference room with many guards on standby. Lan began speaking, and on the table in front of her was a box covered with a red cloth. Lan explained that they might have felt an evil force entering their world, causing the rise of the fallen. However, this was incorrect. She removed the cloth, revealing a large glass box underneath with a red sphere inside. She told everyone there was no evil force, it was merely an overlap from another world. Seeing Roland's astonished expression, Garcia whispered in his ear, saying this was erosion or a maybe loophole. The world had become riddled with these holes, and this was the culprit. Suddenly, someone stood up and demanded Lan explain more clearly what she meant by another world. Was she suggesting the fallen were some sort of aliens? The room then grew noisy, which Lan called for silence, and the guards lifted the glass box. Lan pointed to the red sphere, urging everyone to look closely. 3 cameras from different directions then activated, projecting images onto a large screen behind her. The screen displayed 3 different angles of the sphere. However, Roland noticed that no matter the angle, the sphere looked exactly the same. Lan picked up an iron stick and thrust it into the sphere. Instead of penetrating it, the stick appeared shortened. Suddenly, a person stood up and approached the stage, staring intently at the sphere. He then used his ability while reaching forward. Seconds later, he let out a horrific scream as his fingers vanished. He was quickly taken away for treatment. Roland stood up, ready to take a closer look. He stared intently at the sphere, which looked oddly familiar to him. He had seen a similar sight in the divine realm, where the red glow represented the red moon. While Roland was deep in thought, he heard Lan asking him if his name was Roland. Without looking at him, Lan mentioned that she had heard from Garcia that Roland was a rare type of awakened individual who was not swayed by desires, telling him that Garcia was very happy that he had chosen to join the association. Roland was lost for words. He remembered Garcia's expressionless face when she had him fill out the application. She didn't look very happy. Lan continued, saying she disliked people who weren't on time, but said it was a common flaw since most couldn't perceive the passage of time or hear it ticking away. For some special individuals, however, this was an intolerable flaw. If Roland didn't value his unique qualities, he would soon be left behind. Roland thought perhaps Lan was warning him not to cause trouble. Before he could say anything, she then called the next person up. Roland paid little attention to what Lan was saying, as it didn't matter to him very much. His mind was only focused on the red sphere. It reminded him of the underground civilization's research. The red moon was key to converting magical power and was the foundation of the dream world's existence. Witches could see the red moon because that world was real, while this one was a construct that he and Zero had created. Put it in simpler terms, it felt like someone plugged into a simulation. Garcia looked at him and asked if he understood now. Roland nodded and remarked that her teacher wasn't as fearsome as she had made her out to be. This caught Garcia off guard. Roland smiled, saying Lan had spoken to him about many things, like how special he was and how the association had high hopes for him, adding that her teacher even mentioned how happy Garcia was for him joining them. He expected a reaction from Garcia but was met with a bewildered expression. She told him that her teacher hadn't spoken at all when he was on stage. Hadn't spoken at all? Roland was stunned. Before he could ask more, Lan covered the red sphere and clapped her hands, drawing everyone's attention back to the stage. She was about to explain the origin of the erosion. Lan explained that their world wasn't flat but rather existed on a membrane with curvature. To put it simply, it was curved, and these variations were more noticeable in certain places. If another world existed outside their own, the two worlds intersected at certain points, and this intersection was what they called erosion. She admitted that she wasn't sure how this affected the other world, but for them, energy flowed from higher to lower areas, creating a series of incredible phenomena. Their powers, as well as those of the fallen, were related to this energy. At this point, many people stood up, thinking it was nonsense. They believed their powers were their own and asked if she meant that the association thought they were no different from the fallen. Lan remained silent but didn't respond. After the room quieted down, she continued, stating that there was indeed a difference. They could control this energy, while the fallen could not. She warned that as energy continued to spread, more fallen would appear, and this was a matter of survival. If they didn't defeat the fallen, their world would be utterly destroyed. As we returned to Neverwinter, Roland was snapped out of his reverie by Nightingale's voice calling, "Your Majesty." "Your Majesty?" He suddenly sat up. Barav had been waiting for Roland's response. Taking a deep breath to calm himself, Roland told Barav to proceed as he suggested. Barav nodded, then reminded Roland to take care of his health. Roland asked Nightingale if he looked bad. She observed him and said he seemed fine but noted that he had been spacing out a lot lately, asking if it might be related to the dream world. Roland shook his head, but internally, he was thinking that this was the 4th day since he had left the dream world. Faulty had successfully pinpointed the association's headquarters, but Ling hadn't been able to infiltrate it. However, as he returned from the headquarters, the subsequent plans had gone smoothly, and he took the Takira witches for a fun field trip. However, what he saw and learned from the headquarters weighed heavily on his mind. The connection between divine war, erosions, fallen and the theory of world overlapping made Roland a bit hesitant about entering the dream world again. He decided that once all the Takira witches had enjoyed the dream world at least once, he would temporarily sever the connection. Nightingale's voice echoed in his ear again, snapping Roland out of his daze. She was worried, but Roland reassured her that he was fine, telling her that he was just a bit overwhelmed with things to consider lately, leaving him feeling fatigued. Nightingale sat on the table, crossing her legs with a mischievous smile. Saying his excuse didn't sound very convincing. Could it be that Roland was spending too much time with those witches in the dream world? Roland almost choked, but quickly interrupted her, denying any such possibility, explaining that he had only taken them out to eat and have fun. Nightingale nodded, her abilities confirming that Roland wasn't lying. She winked and changed to a cunning smile, playfully saying she was just worried because she couldn't enter the dream world and couldn't always protect him. If the witches decided to cause trouble, it could be problematic. After all, having regained their senses after hundreds of years, they would definitely want to relive all their past sensations. With over 20 of them, how could he possibly handle them all?